A 17-year-old black teen is labeled a spy just for sitting in the pilot lounge. Surrounded by suspicion, insulted, and humiliated, Malik is on the verge of breaking down. No one believes him. But everything shifts the moment his father walks in, the director of the Federal Aviation Administration. In that instant, the truth explodes into the open. Power flips on its head, and the racist pilot is forced to face the consequences. The entire airport falls into stunned silence. It's a dramatic reversal of fate, one that no one saw coming. The hum of rolling luggage filled the terminal at JFK. Travelers bustled through Gate 34, eyes fixed on departure boards, clutching coffee cups and passports. Amid the noise, Malik Carter, a 17-year-old with soft eyes and a quiet presence, sat alone on a bench, flipping through a worn aviation manual. His hoodie was slightly oversized, and a pair of headphones hung loosely around his neck. His backpack bore the embroidered emblem of a youth flight academy. To the casual eye, he looked like any teenager, but inside him beat the heart of a future pilot. Malik wasn't there for vacation. This trip was different. He was flying solo for the first time, not in the cockpit, but on a commercial airline to attend a youth aviation conference in Atlanta. An event sponsored by NASA, the FAA, and a dozen top aviation schools. He had earned his spot through hard work, top scores in science, and a personal essay about the first time he watched a plane rise into the air from his backyard. And while he may have looked calm, his palms were damp with nerves. Not far away, a middle-aged white woman in a sharp airline captain's uniform stood by the counter, glancing at the crowd. Her name tag read, Capt. Dana Whitaker. Her posture was strict, her tone curt with her crew. She had served for 2 decades in the air, but had grown increasingly bitter with time. The skies, to her, were not about dreams anymore. They were about procedures, protocol, and control. Behind her, Melanie Torres, a Latina gate agent in her early 30s, was checking boarding passes. Her eyes were kind but tired. She had noticed Malik earlier, his politeness, the careful way he handled his belongings. She'd even smiled at him when he asked if he could pre-board to store his small drone project safely. As boarding began, Malik joined Group A, eager to get a window seat. He handed over his ticket and smiled nervously. Melanie scanned it, nodded, and gestured for him to continue. But just before he could take a step forward, a voice cut through the noise. "Excuse me," Cap Whitaker said, stepping between Malik and the jet bridge. Her eyes narrowed. "Can I see some ID?" Malik blinked. "Ma'am, I just showed my ticket." "This is a security concern." "You're traveling alone?" "Correct," she asked, her voice sharp, eyes scanning him as though he were an equation that didn't quite add up. "Yes," he answered, confused. "Is something wrong?" Melanie's eyebrows lifted slightly, sensing something wasn't right. Captain Whitaker turned to her. "This kid claims he's traveling to a government-sponsored event. I just want to make sure everything checks out. Could be a mix-up." Malik's face fell. The warmth in his chest, the pride, the excitement, it began to recede. He felt the weight of the stares around him. Travelers turned their heads. Eyes narrowed. He wasn't just a kid anymore. He was a question mark, a suspicion. From a nearby gate, Jeremiah Carter, a tall, composed man in a tailored charcoal suit, noticed the commotion. He set down his briefcase and stepped closer, his instincts sharp from years of service. He wasn't just Malik's father. He was the Deputy Director of Aviation Security for the U.S. Department of Transportation, and within seconds, everything was about to change. Flight 227 taxied slowly down the runway as the afternoon sun cast long shadows over the tarmac. Inside the Boeing 737, passengers were settling into their seats, adjusting tray tables, and closing overhead bins with the dull thud of plastic latches. Malik Carter sat quietly by the window in row 14A. He hadn't said much since boarding. His backpack, now tucked under the seat in front of him, carried not only his essentials but a carefully packaged model drone he had built from scratch, a personal project he hoped to showcase at the conference in Atlanta. But what should have been a moment of calm, of anticipation, was already tainted. Captain Dana Whitaker's confrontation at the gate had rattled him. Her cold eyes, the way she demanded his ID again and again, even after his documents checked out, lingered in his thoughts. A few rows back, passengers whispered, some peeking in his direction. Malik caught the glance of a woman across the aisle who quickly looked away. He slumped slightly in his seat, pulling his hoodie up as if to shield himself. The boarding door closed with a hiss. From the flight deck, a calm voice came over the intercom. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain, Dana Whitaker. We're expecting smooth skies on our way to Atlanta. Flight time will be approximately 1 hour and 50 minutes. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight." The irony of her tone, so friendly, so composed, did not escape Malik. He stared out the window, watching the city shrink as the aircraft climbed into the clouds. About 20 minutes into the flight, a flight attendant named Sarah Milligan, a cheerful woman in her late 40s, wheeled the beverage cart down the aisle. She stopped at Malik's row. "What can I get you to drink?" "Sweetheart," Malik managed a small smile. "Just water, please." As she poured, Sarah asked, "Are you headed home or traveling for something fun?" "I'm going to a youth aviation conference," he said, voice quiet but proud. "I want to be a pilot." Her smile widened. "Really, that's wonderful. We need more young minds in this industry." Malik's face lit up for a moment, until another voice pierced the mood. "Excuse me," said a sharply dressed man in a blazer from the aisle seat of row 13. He leaned over his shoulder, eyes fixed on Malik. "Is that your drone kit under the seat?" "Yes, sir," Malik said, startled. "It's just a model. I built it for—" "You shouldn't be allowed to carry that on board," the man cut in. "For all we know, it's a security risk." The cabin fell uncomfortably quiet. Sarah, trying to defuse the situation, said gently, "Sir, TSA already cleared his carry-on. It's completely safe." But the man wouldn't stop. "Look, I'm not trying to be difficult, but this kind of thing, it's how breaches happen. I've seen the news." Malik's hands clenched in his lap. His voice was steady, but his eyes glistened. "I worked for months on it. It's just a model. I even have a certificate for this program." Before he could finish, the captain's voice came through the intercom again. "Flight crew, please report to the cockpit." Sarah gave Malik an apologetic look and rolled the cart forward. Minutes later, Malik saw Sarah speaking quietly with Captain Whitaker near the galley. Whitaker's expression darkened. She glanced toward Malik, then spoke into her radio. Less than a minute later, 2 flight attendants approached his row. "Sir," one said softly, "the captain has requested to speak with you." Can you come with us? The entire row turned. Malik froze. Why, I didn't do anything. It's just a quick conversation, the attendant said, voice tight. Please bring your bag. Passengers were now openly staring. Whispers spread like wildfire. As Malik stood, carefully retrieving his bag, he noticed a woman recording with her phone. He wanted to shrink, to disappear. He followed them toward the front of the plane. Inside the cockpit, Whitaker didn't even look up. This is becoming a pattern, Mr. Carter, she said curtly. You were flagged at the gate. Now passengers are uncomfortable with your belongings. I need to ensure there's no threat to this flight. Malik's voice cracked. You're treating me like a criminal. I did everything right. I showed my ID. I followed the rules. Whitaker finally looked at him, her eyes cold, dismissive. Intentions don't matter in aviation security. Appearances do. Those words struck him like a slap. But it's not illegal to look like me, is it? He whispered. The silence that followed was heavy. Suddenly, a voice erupted from the forward cabin. Where's my son? It was deep, authoritative, and familiar. The cockpit door opened slightly, and Jeremiah Carter stepped in, badge already visible, face set in stone. Whitaker's eyes widened. Mr. Carter, she said, startled. He nodded once. Deputy Director Jeremiah Carter, Federal Aviation Administration. The color drained from Whitaker's face. I received a call from my son, Jeremiah said, stepping between them. I heard enough. I want a full report on this flight's treatment of my child, starting with your decision to remove him from his seat without cause. Whitaker stammered. I was only following protocol. No, Jeremiah said sharply. You were following bias, and that ends today. He turned to Malik, placing a steady hand on his shoulder. You okay? Malik nodded slowly, though tears brimmed in his eyes. He wasn't okay. Not really. But with his father standing beside him, he finally felt safe. Whitaker opened her mouth, but the co-pilot gently tapped her arm and whispered, Ma'am, we need to talk. Jeremiah addressed the crew. My office will follow up. This matter isn't over. And as the plane continued its steady course toward Atlanta, a different kind of turbulence lingered in the cabin, one that had nothing to do with air pressure, but everything to do with justice. When Flight 227 touched down in Atlanta, the cabin felt unusually silent. Passengers glanced at Malik as if trying to decide whether to say something or stay quiet. Some were curious. Some were ashamed. A few avoided his eyes altogether. The wheels screeched against the tarmac, and the aircraft taxied slowly to Gate C7. Malik didn't say a word. He just sat still, hands clasped tightly in his lap, heart pounding with the echoes of Captain Whitaker's accusation and his father's sudden intervention. The worst part wasn't the humiliation. It was the familiarity of it, the haunting knowledge that this wasn't new. Just louder, more public. When the seatbelt sign chimed off, passengers rose and stretched, retrieving their bags, ready to step back into their lives. But Malik stayed seated. His father, Jeremiah Carter, stood waiting at the front of the cabin. Not as a bureaucrat, not even as a federal official, just as a father. Protective, proud, silent. The flight attendants looked nervously between one another as they opened the door to the jet bridge. Dana Whitaker stood stiffly to the side, face pale, her usual confidence stripped bare. She tried to make eye contact with Jeremiah but found herself looking down instead. As Malik stood, Jeremiah gently placed a hand on his son's shoulder again. "Let's go," he said quietly. They stepped out together. But instead of a quiet exit, they were met with a wall of press cameras, officials, and airport personnel. Word had traveled fast. Somehow, someone had uploaded a clip of Malik being escorted to the cockpit. It had already made its rounds on social media by the time the plane landed. The caption was simple: "Black teen harassed by pilot for bringing a model plane on board." The clip had over 2 million views by the time Malik walked through the terminal. "Mr. Carter, is it true your son was removed from his seat? Is the FAA investigating the airline? Do you believe this was racially motivated?" The questions came fast, urgent, hungry for a soundbite. Jeremiah raised a hand, not with the sternness of authority, but with the dignity of a man who'd had enough. "No comments right now. My son has just experienced something no child should. He deserves peace before justice." And with that, they walked past the cameras, step by step. Malik's eyes locked on the floor as he followed the firm stride of the man who taught him to stand tall. They didn't speak in the car. Atlanta's skyline shimmered in the early evening light, tall buildings like glass pillars reflecting a world that felt colder now. When they pulled into the hotel driveway, Jeremiah finally turned off the engine and looked at his son. "You want to talk about it?" he asked gently. Malik didn't answer right away. Then, slowly, "It's not just her. It's everyone." Jeremiah listened. The guy in the seat in front of me. Yo, the people whispering. Even the lady recording. They all looked at me like I didn't belong there. "You do belong there," Jeremiah said firmly. "But they didn't think so. And she, Captain Whitaker, she made sure everyone knew I was a threat. Just because I had a drone. You didn't do anything wrong. That's the part that hurts the most." Jeremiah's voice softened. "I've spent my whole life in this system, trying to make it safer, more fair. But no amount of rank can protect you from prejudice. Today wasn't just about a flight. It was about every room that's ever made you feel smaller." He paused. "But that video is doing something. People saw it. They saw how calm you were, how composed. That's powerful." Malik's lips twitched. "I didn't feel powerful. Sometimes the quietest resistance is the loudest." The next morning, Jeremiah received a call from Alicia Monroe, the airline's chief diversity officer. She sounded nervous. "Mr. Carter, we've reviewed the footage. We are deeply sorry. Captain Whitaker has been placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation." Jeremiah didn't respond. "We're also initiating mandatory bias training across all flight staff. This incident, this failure, won't be ignored." "And Malik," Jeremiah asked, "we'd like to issue a formal apology to him in person." Jeremiah paused. "My son doesn't need your apology to validate his worth. But he'll hear it. Because accountability matters." Later that afternoon, Malik stood beside his father at a press conference organized by the FAA and the airline. Cameras flashed. Reporters jostled. But the boy who had been humiliated at 1,100 feet now stood at a podium, taller somehow. "I'm not here today to talk about revenge," Malik said, voice steady. "I'm here to talk about what it means to grow up being told to work twice as hard, only to be treated like you don't belong when you get there. He looked up. I want to be a pilot, and I still do, even after what happened, especially after what happened. Because we need people in those seats who see past color, past bias. We need people who remember what it's like to sit in row 14A and feel invisible. A hush settled over the crowd. I'm not invisible, Malik said, eyes shining. And I never was. The room erupted in applause. That night, Malik sat alone on the hotel balcony, watching planes streak across the dark sky, their lights blinking like stars in motion. His father stepped out beside him, 2 mugs of hot tea in hand. Jeremiah handed one to Malik and sat down. You know, he said softly, sometimes change starts with a moment nobody planned. One that hurts, one that tests you. But what you do with that moment, that's what changes everything. Malik nodded. He didn't say anything. But in the silence, something shifted. He wasn't just the boy who got profiled on a plane anymore. He was the young man who stood up, who spoke out, and the world, finally, was listening. The day after Malik's speech, the world didn't just hear him, they responded. News outlets from CNN to BBC featured the story on their homepages. The headline that echoed across platforms read, "Teen profiled on flight speaks out, I'm not invisible, and I never was." Within hours, the video of his calm yet powerful statement at the press conference amassed over 10 million views. Comment sections overflowed with praise, outrage, solidarity. Parents wrote in, saying they saw their own children in Malik. Pilots of color, some nearing retirement, admitted this was the speech they wished they'd heard when they were young. But while the world rallied behind Malik, the airline reeled from the backlash. Protests erupted outside corporate headquarters in Dallas. Former employees began sharing their own stories under a now-trending hashtag, #ShasherFlying, while Black Captain Dana Whitaker, once considered a rising star in the aviation world, became the face of unconscious bias in uniform. Though she had issued a written apology through the airline's legal team, many felt it lacked sincerity. A statement without presence is just PR. One tweet read. Meanwhile, inside the FAA, the impact of Jeremiah Carter's dual roles as father and deputy director was felt deeply. He knew better than anyone that emotion couldn't replace reform. So he got to work. The Monday after the incident, Jeremiah called for an emergency task force meeting with key FAA leadership. He sat at the head of a long oak table in Washington, D.C., flanked by senior advisors, civil rights advocates, and union representatives. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, voice low but resolute. This isn't about one captain or one airline. This is about a culture that has, for too long, tolerated implicit bias under the guise of procedure and policy. He clicked a remote. A slide appeared on the screen, dozens of documented complaints from passengers and staff alike, spanning over a decade, all ignored, all unresolved. We're not here to point fingers, he continued. We're here to draw a line. The room was silent. Then Jeremiah proposed the initiative that would change everything. Project Elevate, Equality and Leadership, Ethics, Vigilance, and Aviation Training Enhancement. It included mandatory anti-bias training for all flight staff and air marshals, a revised escalation protocol to prevent discriminatory profiling on board, anonymous reporting tools for passengers and crew, Public audits of disciplinary actions for airlines with repeated complaints, inclusion of civil rights monitors in annual FAA inspections, and at the heart of it, education. We need to stop training people to follow protocol blindly, Jeremiah said. We need to teach them how to see the person in front of them, not just the seat number. The proposal passed unanimously. Back in Atlanta, Malik returned to school. He expected whispers, stares, maybe even resentment from those who saw him as too famous now. But something strange happened. He was met with silence, respectful silence. His classmates didn't just avoid mocking him, they gave him space. One student, Rosa, even left a note on his locker. I'm proud of you. You spoke for more of us than you know. Still, the attention weighed heavy. Everywhere Malik went, people recognized him. At the mall, in the library, even at the corner store, a man behind the register leaned in and whispered, "Thank you for saying what we've been trying to say for years." But fame wasn't what Malik wanted. He just wanted to fly. One evening, sitting across from his father at the kitchen table, Malik finally said what had been haunting him. "Do you think I got into this flight academy because of what happened?" Jeremiah didn't answer immediately. He met his son's eyes. "I think they saw who you really are, and maybe they needed a wake-up call to see it." Malik looked down. "I just don't want to be a symbol. I want to be a pilot." Jeremiah smiled. "You already are." A month later, Malik was invited to speak at the National Aviation Ethics Conference in San Diego. He didn't want to go at first. He hated the idea of being paraded around. But his mentor at the local flight school, a retired air traffic controller named Mr. Reynolds, changed his mind. "You don't have to carry the world on your shoulders," he said. "Just tell your story. That's enough." So Malik did. He stood before a room full of airline executives, policymakers, and training officers, and instead of delivering a perfect speech, he simply told the truth. "How many of you have ever walked onto a plane and wondered if you belonged?" he asked. No one raised their hand. "But I have," he said, "and I still do. Every time." He paused. "But I keep walking, because the dream is louder than the doubt." The room gave him a standing ovation. Meanwhile, Project Elevate gained national traction. By the end of the quarter, 4 major U.S. airlines adopted the FAA's new bias intervention protocols. A nonprofit called Clear Skies Coalition formed to oversee compliance and support victims of in-flight discrimination. And in a landmark move, Congress passed the Passenger Equality and Safety Act, which codified Malik's experience into legislative action. The act included independent third-party reviews of passenger removal incidents, legal recourse for victims of discrimination by crew members, a scholarship fund for underrepresented youth pursuing aviation careers, named after Malik Carter. When Malik learned about the scholarship, he was stunned. "Why me?" he asked Jeremiah. His father placed a hand over his. "Because one day, someone will sit in a cockpit and say, 'I'm here because Malik Carter showed me I could be.'" The story didn't end with a headline. It didn't end with justice served or reforms passed. It lived on quietly, powerfully in the lives of young dreamers walking through terminals with hope instead of fear, in captains pausing before jumping to conclusions, in passengers standing up for one another, and in one young man sitting in a flight simulator, hands on the yoke, eyes on the sky, not just imagining the future, but flying toward it. For Captain Dana Whitaker, the silence was the loudest part. She had once been accustomed to the bustle of flight briefings, the steady hum of pre-flight checklists, and the occasional nod of respect from crew members who admired her spotless record. But now, her world had narrowed to the walls of her suburban house, the glow of television news she could no longer watch, and the slow erosion of everything she thought she understood. The day after the press conference, she was placed on administrative leave. The email was cold and direct. Pending full investigation and review under FAA oversight, you are relieved of all flight duties, effective immediately. She stared at the message for a long time. She didn't protest, didn't respond, because deep down, beneath the defensiveness and pride, something in her had shifted. Malik's calm voice that day had cut deeper than any formal reprimand. He hadn't yelled. He hadn't accused her personally. But he had spoken the truth. And she had no defense against truth. The airline didn't fare much better. Once seen as a standard-bearer in commercial aviation, Monarch Airlines now found itself embroiled in a PR nightmare. The video of Malik being interrogated on the tarmac had sparked not just outrage, but an investigation by the Department of Transportation and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Lawsuits were filed, some by passengers, others by former employees, who now found courage in Malik's story to speak up. The board of directors moved swiftly. 2 senior executives were forced to resign. Internal HR documents were leaked, revealing a pattern of ignored complaints related to profiling and passenger treatment. Share prices plummeted. Advertisers pulled sponsorships. The CEO was summoned to testify before Congress. But amid the corporate chaos, one moment stood out. A week after the incident, the CEO of Monarch Airlines, Leland Graves, called a press conference. He stepped up to the podium, not flanked by lawyers or PR managers, but standing alone. "I'm not here to defend what happened," he began. "I'm here because we failed, and failure has a cost." He paused. Captain Whitaker did not act alone. She acted in a culture we allowed, one that let fear masquerade as procedure and bias dress itself as vigilance. Gas rippled through the room. He continued, his voice unshaking. "We are grounding all flight crew for a 30-day mandatory equity and empathy training. We are creating an external ombudsman board for passenger incidents. And effective today, 10% of all company profit will be redirected into aviation scholarships for minority youth. We cannot undo what happened, but we can decide what happens next." It was bold. It was rare. And it was only a start. Meanwhile, Captain Whitaker was called in for a formal FAA hearing. She wore her uniform out of habit, though she knew it was unlikely she'd wear it again in service. Across the long table sat investigators, legal advisors, and a civil rights attorney appointed by the FAA's new oversight committee. The questions were direct. "Why did you single out Malik Carter for interrogation?" Her voice, cracked from days of silence, barely rose. "I didn't see a boy. I saw a threat." "Why?" A pause. "I wish I knew. I've flown with men who look just like him. But this time, I let fear win." Silence fell over the room. She swallowed hard. "I need to say this. I was wrong. And it wasn't the first time I looked away when I should have looked inward." Outside the hearing room, reporters gathered, expecting drama, perhaps denial. What they got instead was something far more human. Captain Whitaker, stepping out, walking toward the cameras, and pausing. I don't ask for forgiveness. I ask for responsibility. I failed a young man, and I failed myself. If I can't be trusted to protect every passenger equally, I don't deserve these wings. With that, she pulled her captain's stripes from her uniform and set them down on the podium. I resign from Monarch Airlines, but I don't walk away from the work. Her resignation made headlines, but so did what she did next. 3 months later, Captain Whitaker began volunteering full-time with the Clear Skies Coalition, the nonprofit born from Project Elevate. Her job training flight crews on implicit bias and emotional intelligence. She didn't stand at the front of the class as a pilot, but as a cautionary tale. She told her story honestly. She showed the video of Malik's confrontation, and then she told them what it felt like to have a 17-year-old boy teach her about justice in front of the whole world. As for Monarch Airlines, reform became their lifeline. They rebranded not with a new logo, but with new leadership and new policies. One of the most symbolic changes came when they announced a new hire, Emery Wilson, a former air marshal and longtime advocate for racial justice, was appointed as the company's chief ethics officer, a position that never existed before. At his first staff meeting, Emery addressed the room. Bias doesn't always come in screaming. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it hides behind procedure. Our job is to listen differently now. And they did. Complaints dropped. Diversity in hiring increased. Passengers began to notice. Not because things were perfect, but because effort was finally visible. And Malik, he watched all of this from the background. He never asked to be a symbol. But sometimes, symbols don't ask. They're made in moments where courage meets injustice. When asked to return to Monarch Airlines for a ceremonial recognition, Malik politely declined. But he sent a letter. I don't need an award. I just need assurance that the next kid walking onto a plane won't have to prove his worth before he takes his seat. Captain Whitaker read that letter aloud in one of her training sessions. Then she looked around the room filled with young pilots, flight attendants, dispatchers, and she said the words she wished someone had told her years ago. People aren't threats. Fear is. And every time we choose humanity over fear, we land safely. The room applauded, not because she had been redeemed, but because she had chosen to rebuild. And in that rebuilding, a quiet revolution took flight. Malik Carter had never imagined the sky would call to him again. After everything that happened after the interrogation, the apology, the media storm, he thought he'd want distance. From airports, from airplanes, from people in uniforms who look through him instead of at him. But life has a way of changing course, sometimes in quiet, unexpected ways. It started with a letter, handwritten, sent to his family home in Atlanta. Dear Malik, we watched how you carried yourself when the world was watching. You reminded us why character is more important than titles. We'd like to offer you a full scholarship to the Tuskegee Institute's Aviation Science Program. If you still believe in the sky, we believe in you. With respect, Captain Nolan Hayes Reddy, Tuskegee Airmen Foundation. His mother found it first. Tears slid down her cheeks before Malik could even finish reading it. He didn't say yes immediately. There was fear, not just of failing, but of facing the very system that had once humiliated him. But his father, Jeremiah Carter, who had worn his own badge with pride and pain alike, looked him in the eye and said, "Son, the best way to change the cockpit is to sit in it." And that was that. Tuskegee changed Malik, not because it was easy, but because it was sacred ground. He studied beneath portraits of black aviators who had flown in wars that barely acknowledged their humanity. He read transcripts from flight logs written by men who defied both gravity and hatred in every mission. He made friends, real ones, fellow dreamers who carried scars of their own. One of them, Jordan Fields, a mechanic's son from Detroit, became like a brother. They would spend late nights on the flight simulator, swapping stories and music playlists, pushing each other through doubt and exhaustion. "Man," Jordan would say with a grin, "you don't just fly the plane, you preach to it." But what grounded Malik most wasn't the machinery, it was the mission. He founded Wings Up, a mentorship group aimed at inspiring black and brown kids to pursue careers in aviation, engineering, and aerospace. Every month, he'd return to high schools across Georgia, standing in front of students who looked just like him, telling them the sky isn't reserved. It's a right. He showed them the video not of his humiliation, but of what came after. He told them about Captain Whitaker's apology, about the new training programs at Monarch Airlines, about the CEO who changed course because one teenager refused to back down. Most importantly, he told them what it felt like to land a plane for the first time. It wasn't just about flying, he'd say. It was about rising above. 5 years later, Malik stood on the tarmac again. But this time, the uniform fit him, the hat, the wings, the confident walk toward the jet he was about to co-pilot. His mother stood at the gate, crying again, but this time from joy. His father gave him a salute, and inside the cockpit, a voice crackled through his headset. "Monarch 237, you are clear for takeoff." He smiled, looked out the window. A boy who had once been treated like a threat was now carrying hundreds of strangers safely through the sky because he believed in tomorrow, because he believed that every unjust landing could still lead to a better flight, and because sometimes you don't just board a plane, you become the pilot of change. Sometimes life hands you a moment so unfair, so humiliating, it threatens to crush everything you built, your confidence, your hope, even your dreams. Malik's story teaches us that how we respond in those moments defines the future we build. He was judged not by his actions, but by his appearance. Humiliated in front of strangers, accused of a crime he didn't commit. But instead of letting the injustice defeat him, Malik held on. He believed in himself even when no one else did. And that belief led him to a place higher than he ever imagined, literally and figuratively. What's the lesson? Your worth isn't determined by someone's misunderstanding of you. It's defined by your response, your courage, and your refusal to be small in the face of judgment. You have a choice to surrender to the world's doubts or to rise with your own truth. So if life ever tells you, you don't belong here, prove it wrong, because the sky doesn't check skin color or background.